has the power to change the world with just 140 characters of hypertext. Everyone in this room has the power to do this. It happened to me. It can happen to you. I encourage you to tweet at Dom during the presentation, and if you have your head down at your phone, I'll assume that's what you're doing. Please do that so we can continue the conversation after this talk. I'd like to tell you the story of Twitter's birth, and then talk a little bit about the best use of Twitter. I'll conclude with a glimpse into the future of social networks as I see it, and then after we're all done, we'll take questions. Twitter is merely the latest installment of the short form, which is actually the oldest form of written word. Think of some older examples: the haiku, the couplet, the salutation, the epitaph, the telegraph. Examples from modern times include the quotation, the headline, the lead sentence, the punchline. Twitter was created as an intersection of three basic principles. The first is simplicity. To me, simplicity is its own reward. I believe you can add value by removing steps from impulse to action. That's what we did when we created Twitter. The second principle that guided our company was constraint. By this I mean constraint of time, of resources, personnel. Constraints enable creativity. They inspire trust. Choose the right constraints and you'll eliminate uncertainty while empowering choice. The third major principle behind the creation of Twitter is what we call craftsmanship. To me, this means something very basic. Only build something that you yourself need to have in this world. Do it for yourself, and you'll notice every flaw and rush to fix it. Craftsmanship means attention to detail and a passion for the experience of using what you've created. It all began in San Francisco, where I live and work. Before Twitter, there were 14 people, including myself, working at a podcasting company called Audio. Raise your hand if you've ever actually produced a podcast. Great. That was about as many people who were podcasting back in 2006. But many of you probably consumed a podcast. You've listened to one. So you know what I'm talking about. Basically an audio pre-recorded that's almost like a channel of your own. I believe we would all have one of these channels. That was why I joined. I believe firmly in the power of the human voice. This is what we looked like back then. I'll dwell for a little bit on this photo. I'm not in it because I took the photo. But this is how we started each day. There's Jack in the front. And I like his pose because he's the lead engineer on this project. And he's in the middle there, joined by our German contractor, Florian, and then our designer in the opposite complementary pose. And you can almost see the left and right brain working in this photo. What we did was we'd have this standing meeting, and if you want to keep your meetings short, make them stand up. We would do something very simple. We called it Scrum. So if you're an engineer, if you've been doing some development, you recognize the agile methodology. It's something that we use to rapidly iterate on an idea. And I'll name the other people in this photo. You get an idea of what the company was really like. We would take turns taking notes. So there's Tim, our VP of product, and there's Noah, one of our co-founders. There is Tony, who's our director of engineering. There's BizStone, sort of sneaking in the back there. You guys know Biz, he's one of the co-founders of Twitter. And there is our lead developer sitting down during a standing meeting. And you'll understand the culture of the company when I tell you his name was Ravel. He was a troublemaker. He's a self-identified anarchist. Good friend of mine, an amazing individual, incredible programmer, definitely a dissenter. My role was head of quality, which meant that I got to break it before the user did. You can think of me as user number 1 at Audio. Audio was the finest failure I've ever witnessed. It was, I think, one of the things that distinguishes Silicon Valley from other tech communities is our appreciation for failure. And Odeo was on the brink of failure when we had a brainstorm. We called it a hackathon. Raise your hand if you've heard this word before. Okay, good, great. It's basically an idea contest. Yes, Twitter was a side project born of desperation. With the pressure of competition from Apple and other big companies in the podcasting space, we weren't growing fast enough. We had to reinvent ourselves. We broke up into teams, and Jack and I formed one small team with Florian, and I brought us to the top of this children's slide outside the office, which I thought would be a creative place to start sharing ideas. This is where Jack first hinted at his idea to make it so simple you don't even think about it. You just write. Arguably, people don't think about it. Maybe that's a problem. This is Jack's original sketch, something he drew years before joining Odeo. It looks familiar, so simple. The one text field, the one button, the simple instruction, preset, and the ability to find your friends. This is what we produce based on that design. The one text field, the one button, all of our friends in a row. These basically were the first users of the system. The first 50 or so people were just us, 14, and our friends and family. Brother to Crystal, who is our support engineer, sister to, I believe that's Tony's sister, brother to Jack, Biz, Evan, my wife, Evan's wife, myself, reacting to this new style that we had. It was a revelation. The actual working code for Twitter was developed in under 1 month. Note the shortened form of the word Twitter. That was because the original intent was to fit the entire experience inside a text message. And in the US, short codes are 5 characters, so we thought it would be very memorable if we fit our company name inside 5 characters. But what really happened was that everyone didn't know how to spell it. So we had to add some vowels, which we did very shortly. We used it to connect with each other outside of the office. And it was clear to me from day one that this social network was less about content and more about the human connection. The service kicked off on March 21st, 2006 with a conversation between Jack, the lead developer, and myself, head of quality. It started out with tweet number 35, waiting for Dom to update more. And my reaction was immediate, number 38. Oh, this is going to be addictive. And that observation stands. It might be why I'm here today, to help you tame that addiction. Raise your hand if you feel like you're addicted to Twitter. I'm going to raise my hand really high. I'll share with you a little fact which may make you cringe. If you think you're addicted to Twitter, I have 81 accounts on the system. I'm not embarrassed by this. I've tried every possible voice that you can try: comedic, dramatic, journalistic, poetic. I've tried them all, and I can tell you that there is a multiplicity of styles that can fit inside this tiny space. Perhaps because of its simplicity or that constraint that enables creativity, it is quite addictive. We started out with almost no constraints, and that led to some issues. One issue that cropped up immediately was the privacy factor. We designed it to be open. We built it using open source, and we wanted everyone to be talking out loud in public. This created a little bit of confusion when I, as head of quality, decided it was important for me to follow everyone in the system. And that included Jack's mom. And Jack came to me, he's like, Dom, my mom asked me, who's this guy Dom and why is he following me? He had to make an explanation, and it was kind of unpleasant. So we put a flag on the system which allowed the administrators like us to see that a person wanted to be private. And that's the origin of the protected status on Twitter. So you have 2 ways of using it. You can use it in public, or you can choose who follows you, and that's called protected these days. Back then we called it private. One constraint that was enforced early on was a 140 character limit. This came about because our original vector, as I said, was a text message, and we saw that SMS was about to take off in the States as it had in Europe and in Asia. Of course, text messages are notoriously unreliable. Raise your hand if you've ever had a text message delivered way late or not at all. Keep your hand up if you use it as an excuse, even though you know it was delivered. I've done it. There were these bugs, and there was no limit. Messages would arrive out of order, or sometimes not at all, or much later. And so in February of 2007, Jack wrote a decree that each tweet should be limited to 140 characters to leave room for the username inside that text message. And there was an uproar. People showed up at our door. Imagine if your boss told you you could only write 3 sentences in your next email forevermore. You'd show up at their door and give them more than 3 sentences of your mind. We were getting postcards. We were getting flowers that were wilted. It was disastrous. But Jack's response was immediate, and he wrote a tweet, which is something I quoted earlier on, which is that one could change the world with 140 characters. And that was the day I started writing this book. So if you miss some of the things I'm saying, or if you want some more detail, please be my guest to find this online. It's available in download. It's also available in app form. And I would encourage you to do that, because there's much more than I can say on stage today inside that. Soon after this moment, the team appeared at the annual South by Southwest conference in Texas with a brilliant demonstration of real-time messaging. They stuck plasma screens in the hallways, and you get an idea of how old the story is when I tell you they were actually plasma and not LCD. As people exited the sessions that they were commenting on, perhaps snarkily, perhaps ironically, maybe critically, they would see their own messages, their own words twittering across the screen in a beautiful animation. And imagine yourself critiquing me as I'm giving this speech right now, and then, hello, great, thanks very much, afterwards, ha ha ha, walk out the door, and there's your face, your message, right next to me. It was a sort of awkward moment for some people. And it was a realization that what we're doing is writing in public. But it was also an incredible demonstration of real-time communication and an understanding of how vital and public the service really was. In 2007, Twitter won for Best Mobile Startup at South by Southwest. And Jack addressed the audience by saying, "I'd like to thank everyone in 140 characters, and I just did." Skip ahead 1 year to 2008. Lots of people are using Twitter, but not everyone knew about it. Then an airplane landed on the Hudson. This picture, which ended up on the front page of newspapers and the nightly news on television, was the first introduction many people had to Twitter. The caption was short but highly authentic. On a ferry, going to rescue some people from the plane that just landed on the Hudson. Crazy. You can almost hear the person saying it. And he was really not a journalist. He was really not a photographer, as you can kind of tell from the grainy quality of the photo. But it's clearly a plane. That's clearly the Hudson. That's clearly New York City. That's how it ended up on the front page news. What began as a tool for self-expression quickly became a tool for breaking news. But still, many people did not understand Twitter. And to help you understand a little bit more about its power, take a moment to examine the anatomy of a tweet. Let's see, there's the message there, surrounded by all of this meta context. This is the power of hypertext, to change the meaning of words by meta context and links. There's the message itself, but also who sent it, where, when, how, to whom. There's a scope to each message that reminds me of an iceberg. The visible portion is only a small sample of its depth. The next time you write a tweet, think about this graphic and imagine how much context you're writing every time you do it. It really is the simplest and easiest way to create hypertext. It does save you massive amounts of steps from impulse to action. That power became evident a few years later when President Obama was elected. He was the most followed user on the system. How many people do you think were following Barack Obama when he was elected in 2008? Just shout it out. Million? 10 million? 47 million. That'd be awesome. I wonder if there's a user right now who has 47 million. I don't think so. Actually, so it was 180,000 people following him. That gives you an idea of how big the community was or how small it was back then. These were early adopters. These were influencers. These were his peers. These were his supporters. These were the sort of influencers. To this day, the name of the game is authenticity and a reliance on human emotion to drive action. For me, the most satisfying thing is to see world leaders like this writing with their own voice and their own hand. We must lead by example. When talking about leadership, I like to use the metaphor of the far-seeing falcon. You are there to inspire your audience with vision and majesty. Take a lesson from journalism and describe the world around you. Use active verbs. Engage the passion words: hope, feel, think, wish, love, hate, believe. Give your readers a call to action. Tell them what to do. In some cases, you must tell them what not to do. For example, I always say, don't tweet when you're angry, or tired, or emotionally compromised. Don't give too much information, but just enough. Reinforce, don't replace real life or face-to-face communication. If you must tweet, add value to the conversation. Add a link or a reference or a bit of precision or an image. Try to fit your speaking voice into your writing voice. If you say like, put it in there. If you pause and you say put that in there. Give it a try. If you cut yourself off, like I'm doing right now in my speech, if you cut yourself off, make that dash, that M dash, which allows you to do that. Try to fit your speaking voice into your writing voice. That's the trick. I'll put this up here and you can hear his voice right now, can't you? Writing this tweet I am. If you can, try to master one small portion of the experience, like searching or linking, the photo caption, or the comedic style. It's really hard to do the comedic style, I must say. Irony and sarcasm are very hard to reproduce in text. Evolve your own style by imitating the masters like Hemingway or Shakespeare or a revered religious figure. Create an oasis in the desert of meaning online. Once you've done this, your life will accelerate. You'll find that the experience is not about how many people are following you, but rather who are they? Are they world leaders, local leaders, religious figures, or cultural icons? Strive always to enlist the most interesting and inspiring people in your life. One thing I used to do early on was to try to get all my family to use it. My friends still give me a hard time for keeping them up at night with my late night tweets when they were on the East Coast and I was on the West Coast. I give them a lot of credit for using the system back then and sticking with it. You want followers who can keep up with you. People who react, respond, and engage with you. These are the lessons that Twitter has taught me. I've talked a little bit about Twitter's history and some of the lessons that I've learned. There's a lot more to this, but I'd like to shift now to an example of the best possible use of Twitter. How do we achieve the greatest good? In recent years, we've seen how Twitter can be used as a political tool for social change. But let's look at an example that's a little bit more tame and holds true to the way Twitter was created. Let's use Twitter to build more Twitters. The origin of Twitter was a hackathon. I'd like to tell you how to run one of these so you can build your own Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. It begins with a tweet, a single call to action. 1 year after Twitter launched, my friends and I used it to organize a conference to celebrate the launch of iPhone. Raise your hand if you use iPhone. Just curious. Okay, very pleasurable. I'm a big Apple fanatic. You'll learn this about me. It's probably obvious with my machine here. This is a picture of our first attempt, 1 week after iPhone launched. The founders are there on the front, each one of them a paragon of open source. This guy happens to have co-authored SSL, the secure socket layer, which allows you to send an encrypted message. This guy's a master inventor at IBM. He's the first recipient of the Facebook Fund. There's a Newton. Look, there's a woman. Raise your hand if you know what I mean by the word open source, by the way. So some of you. For those of you who don't understand, open source means sharing the code, the DNA of software so that everyone can benefit. From first tweet to first seat took 21 days of effort. It starts on a weekend with a Friday evening pitch session. 30 seconds on stage is all you get to start recruiting your team. You arrive with an idea, and that's it. Everything else must be completed in the 48-hour weekend. The concept of iOS Developer Camp is to create founding teams. We operate entirely on sponsorship and give all of the proceeds away to the winners. Saturday starts with an inspiring speech, and then we open up the microphone to anyone to ask a question or ask for help. What the organizers look for are people like Kaylin here who demonstrate collaboration and a can-do attitude. We judge them not only by what they produce, but how they do it, who they are, and how they work together. On the last day comes a competition. It's a lonely 3 minutes on stage, where only the bravest and boldest dare to present, like 12-year-old Kritika here. If you follow this formula, you can double in size the next year, like this. And you can see in the background, it wasn't just the folks in this room, but also folks around the world tuned in via satellite. You can see the community diversifying a little bit, and everyone in this front row right here has their own company now. This guy's retired. If you're not careful, you'll triple in size the following year. 700 people here at Yahoo in Sunnyvale. 1,000 people not pictured online who tuned in via satellite. You can see more women. Not as many kids, though. Take care to cultivate the most active and talented designers and developers, as we did when iPad launched in 2010. There they are using my app, big words, to express themselves. I gave the app away for free that weekend just so they could do this photograph. Follow the open source model and allow others to promote your brand and use this formula. We did this in Amsterdam. These are the winners using our nerd gang sign of the 2 brackets. Sold his company to Facebook, sold his company to Disney, partners with me, independently wealthy, etc. This gave birth to Appsterdam, a year-round support network for developers with a global headquarters in Holland. We took that idea and created a local headquarters of our own back in the United States, like this one at PayPal, which hosts us each year. More kids, more women, more peace signs. Diversify the community. Include more than your average nerd, but also women and children. Really young children. This year, iOS Developer Camp had 71 submissions to the contest, 59 demos, more than half of which went open source. Celebrate the role of women and teenagers as innovators, and watch what happens. 12-year-old Kritika won Best Entrepreneur this year, with help from our guru, Andrew Stone. Do you guys have ever heard of this app called Twiddlator? One person nodding their head? 2? Okay, great. This is the guy who wrote Twiddlator. He, again, is pretty well off at this point, and he donates much of his time to the community. He's a sponsor, he's a speaker, and what he does is he basically loans himself out for the weekend. He doesn't compete. He's only here actually representing his son who helped out. His son happens to have Asperger's, by the way, so if you think that you have a problem, dealing with people. Imagine not being able to socially understand social cues and having to form a team and work with. In fact, this is so funny. Kritika said, I'm here and I wanted to tell you that Eli says, Eli is the son, Eli says, if we win, he had everything to do with it, and if we lose, he didn't do any of it. Sisters Angie and Maggie won again this year for Best Educational App with a concept for people who wish to train to become black belts. These two girls could probably kick my butt. They really did a great job with their presentation. They're two-time winners. My favorite example, though, and proof that absolutely anyone can build a Twitter. This team of girls won our Best New Developer prize by walking on stage with crayon drawings of screenshots to represent their game. It was absolutely adorable. And I mean, the whole spirit, to me, the whole spirit of the camp and the experience is represented by her attitude here. She's so happy. I wonder if she understands what's really going on. I give these examples because I think Abu Dhabi is the ideal place to build the next Twitter. This region is the cradle of civilization, after all. Where else should the next big thing spring from? Twitter is a tool for connecting people and organizations. It's a tool for conversation and public debate. And people ask me all the time, what comes next after Twitter? What is the future of social networks? It's clear to me that specialized, niche social networks are where we're headed. Here are a couple of examples, and we'll talk afterwards about a few more. In 2005, Odeo had an intern. He absorbed the principles of simplicity, constraint, and craftsmanship. He pivoted from his original idea, just like Odeo did, to create Twitter. Raise your hand if you recognize the app that produced this photograph of San Francisco. Some of you. Go ahead and shout it out. Instagram, right? The Odeo intern was named Kevin Systrom. Later became the CEO of Instagram. And sold it to Facebook for $1 billion. This is an Instagram of an Instagram of an Instagram. This is the perfect example of constraint-enabling creativity. There were plenty of other photo sharing apps on the market when Instagram launched. Many of them did more than Instagram does, but none of them did fewer things or better. Kevin took the absolute minimum viable product and made it the best it could be. My final example demonstrates the power of a niche social network to generate positive social change. It's been said that there are 3 types of social networks: on the web, of the web, and not on the web. Of the web, like Facebook, where arguably the best experience lives in your browser. On the web, but not of the web, like Twitter, where the best experience really is in that client application, that iOS app or that Android app or that BlackBerry app. And then there's the third type, which is not on the web. And the best example that I can think of is your contact list, your private contact list, with that one very special number in it. I see people smiling. That one very special email address you would never share with Facebook. This is the story of that third type and how our small team volunteered to create a revolutionary tool to help win Obama's first election. We called it Obama 08. And its best feature was Call Friends, which sorted your contact list by swing state. You know what I mean by swing state? In America, we have the Electoral College, and some states have more sway or more influence or more votes than others. And so we wanted to make sure that folks would reach out to the people they already knew and just have a conversation. It worked. In the month leading up to the election, we generated over 41,000 phone calls. I don't think that the 10 of us volunteers could have made 41,000 phone calls ourselves if we'd sat down. So this is really a force multiplier. And this is the type of engagement that social networks are made for. Action at scale. I could sit here and talk to you about how many downloads we had, which is a record number. I could sit here and tell you about what percentage of users that was on the system, on the overall App Store market. But to me, the value in this was the action that we all took, those phone calls, those human moments, those connections between people. You can do this. You can create a niche social network of your own. It starts by doing something that all great leaders do first. Listen. I think a lot of people mistake Twitter as a tool for writing only, and in fact, you could use the tool and be very effective by simply listening. And I could tell you the tale of my good friend from college, who is user number 80, I believe, on the system, and he never tweets. And I confronted him with this, and he's a graduate of Swarthmore, actually. I said, Ben, you're such a good poet. You're such a good writer. Really, we're missing your voice. Why don't you write more? He said, I use Twitter every day, but I do it to spy on my competition, my blabbermouth competition, who tells me where they are, what conferences they're at, and what they're developing, so I can one-up them. He is kind of a genius. Cultivate your Twitter feed by following the best innovators like Ben, the most authentic and human reporters of news in your daily life. Be ready with your skills to avail you when news hits and you are on the front line. Miniaturize your voice to fit inside this tiny space. Use the tools of literature and poetry to craft an authentic human moment so that your followers unmistakably know that you're writing. I'm going to just digress a little bit and tell you something that I discovered over years of using this. At first, I decided I would tweet just once a day, and I would spend a lot of time identifying that moment and putting words to that, and then when that moment came, I would fire off, and then I'd be done. And I did this for about a year. And after a while, I reviewed my feed, and I realized that I was producing quite a robotic voice. And it was very precise, it was very effective, but it really lacked a kind of sense of who was writing this. And there were not those moments of and like that a human is doing this. And it was about that time I started to just talk about what I felt and what I thought, and I used those passion words, and I got a lot more engagement. So I just encourage you to use your voice as if you were speaking and just try to just write everything that you're saying. It's the simplest trick. And if you run into the limit, then try to find those poetic examples, those inspirational figures, and imitate them. If you can do this, if you can cultivate an audience that's ready to act and engage with you, then it's easy to imagine a bigger future. Dream big, but start small. Thank you.